This is disgusting. You think so?
I think too.
Hold on.
Are we recording? I know we are on mine. Are you recording?
I take two. Okay.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the first episode of the Bob and Eric Show. I'm Bob, and this is my assistant,
Eric.
All right, so I guess first things first. Okay, I wasn't going to enter with this, but F it. Okay, so I got off work this morning, like 8 o'clock,
Yeah.
and I go inside and I'm like BSing in there for a while, and then I step outside for some air. And I'm on my phone and I'm on Instagram, and I see like this article, like it was Notre Dame was on fire. Like,
Oh, I know. Okay. I somehow ended up in the back, and found a second of free time, and pulled out my phone. Saw that you texted me some like picture.
Yeah.
And so I got. I actually had to put my phone away at that point, and then went and did some, bowl over there for, like an hour and a half, and then ended up going back to the back and pulled out my phone again, and actually opened up the picture because I had a little longer.
Yeah.
And I saw some like cathedral burning down, and I was like, what? And I didn't read the headline because I didn't have time. And so then at like my lunch break, I like investigated. And I was at the apartment place getting my my stuff fixed. I was like, hey, I need to take 10 minutes. They haven't fixed my stuff, and I asked them to. Here's the stuff and whatever. And
You checked your phone.
yeah, so I investigated, and I looked back, and I was like, Notre Dame was on fire this morning, and I was like, the F,
Yeah.
And I was like, all right, and I started driving back to the place and got lunch and ate, and 2 McChickens with extra mayo.
I remember that.
A tidbit. A tidbit for the fans. They I didn't read it till like this evening.
Yeah.
And like my mom, I told my mom, I was like, hey, Notre Dame was on fire this morning.
Yeah.
And my mom was like, I know, I saw it this morning.
Sketch.
And everything, and they think a terrorist did it, a Muslim woman, and I'm like, squeeze me?
Gosh.
And later I looked at it and I did some reading, and I just kind of went more and more with this, and I was like, 22 years old, who's named, we have a name, or almost, no, it was like a jihadist woman, but,
What was she watching? Like, I mean,
Okay, so like 3 days ago, she threatened something against Notre Dame or something in Paris, like vaguely almost.
yeah.
And then 3 days later, the Notre Dame is up in flames, and they arrest her, on suspect, and there it is, and it's the start of the Holy Week. Which is
I thought was suspect.
the most sacred week to the Catholics.
Because Easter is coming up, all that stuff.
Right.
Palm Sunday. Oh, wait,
Yesterday was Palm Sunday.
yeah.
Our podcast.
So, yeah, okay. For me, like, it hasn't even really like set in yet. Because, like I was saying, I I saw it. I was like, what the F?
this
Like,
real?
yeah, like I was like, I don't know. I was like, what is happening? You know?
It's completely gone.
Well, okay, so
The firefighters focused on getting the art out.
okay, well, I was listening to these guys on the radio, and it was like these local people down in like Keener and Soldotna, and they were saying that there was so much. There was like they referred to it like the interior, all the wood that was burning. They called it like the forest or something because of how much timber was in this thing. And this church is almost 1,000 years old.
Yeah.
Actually, so it sits on this island in a river in Paris, and it's basically kind of where like the city started. It was like the Romans were there, and they were like, okay, there's this island, we can make a fortress. The fortress grew to a lot of things. You go to old cities and stuff, and there's always like an old church. It's like, oh, this is the oldest building in the area or whatever. And they're a lot of times churches, and so when people are like, hey, we are making a place here, you know, they're build a church, you know. And so this thing was built, construction started in the 11th or 12th century.
Yeah, it took 150 years.
Yeah, it was completed in like the 1300s.
13th century.
Yeah,
The 12th.
they're like, I was actually just watching this documentary on Joan of Arc, and I guess they didn't mention Notre Dame, but I guess she had gone there at some point. But anyway, the church has tons and tons and tons of history. And I remember probably within the past 3 years, I was listening to Glenn Beck, and he was tripping out because there was all this terrorism going on in Paris and London. I think Madrid as well. And so he was saying, like, he kind of sometimes will make these quasi predictions, you know, but he doesn't like to give timelines because he says he's bad at timelines, but he's got a good idea of what's, you know, yeah. And so but he said, I want to bring my kids to see Notre Dame soon, because I don't think for much long, I think Notre Dame will be a target for terrorism.
I thought of that actually a while ago, like a long time ago. Like I was like, with all this, like when terrorism in Paris started like rising up, I thought, you know, eventually, you know, something like the Eiffel Tower or maybe Notre Dame is gonna happen. And
or like the Times Square in New York City.
Yeah.
And I do want to throw a disclaimer in here for anyone who's listening, because I at least am not suggesting that there was terrorism. I don't think there was. When I saw the pictures of where the flames were coming from, when it was still a smaller fire, I thought, could it be, you know, because, you know, growing up when 9/11 happened, like, and you see this, and, you know, this, like, it's an iconic place, it's on fire, you know, and it's like, could that be terrorism? And so I'm not saying it was terrorism or it wasn't, but the thought crossed my mind.
we can't, like, either way, we can't say what it was, because
yeah, it's still probably smoldering. Apparently
see it though. In all of its raw history,
it was the wooden interior. Like the whole thing didn't burn down. In fact, I think, what do they call it? The nave, not the nave, but the what's the front, like where the pastor would stand? The
pulpit.
Yeah, the pulpit. I guess that is free and clear.
Really?
That area, and people were tripping, you know, over it.
As in, not touched.
Well, I don't know, but it was unscathed. Like, I guess there were some areas in the church, and that was one of them that supposedly there's pictures of it. They went in and they took pictures of the interior, and anyway. Yeah, it's trippy because there's like a cross in the like right in the center in the foreground. So anyway,
I think
no,
Church on Fire.
but it's also like at Ground Zero. There's St. Paul's Chapel, and it's a colonial. It was built in like 1750s, I think, and actually George Washington was inaugurated on Wall Street, and then he basically walked down to this church, and he did his first church service as president. And that church is still there. It's a chapel. I think it's kind of like an extension of Trinity Church, and which is also nearby. But anyway, there's a graveyard there. There's like graves from like 1700s, and like 2 blocks over is Ground Zero, and there's pictures of the church, right after the towers fell, and there's obviously debris and clutter everywhere, but like none of the candles blew out. They didn't have like a broken window, and you could walk from Ground Zero to this church in probably like 5 minutes, if that.
Wow.
Anyway, and it was actually, it's kind of like a museum now. You go in there and there's firefighter turnouts like resting on this pew, because this was basically where because they would be they called it the pile, Ground Zero. They would be out there for hours and hours and hours, and they would go like sleep on the pews, get some water, stuff like that. Anyway, it's all like, and it's all still there. I haven't been there since like 2010, but
Let's go.
it's kind of trippy, like how sometimes churches have weird powers.
Dodges.
But anyway, yeah, I have been wanting to go see Notre Dame. Since I
was a kid.
Yeah.
I read the book just to see it after.
Yeah. Well, when they made, I think when Disney made The Hunchback of Notre Dame, the artist, that was the old school animation, and the artists, they actually went to Paris and they sat there and they painted it, and they got like, they could look at it, draw it, you'd take their knowledge and go make a cartoon out of it. But
No. Shall we?
So anyway, so yeah, they actually went there and studied it, the architecture and all that, and
I know.
it's trippy. That
Gregorian,
church,
I think, wasn't it? Gregorian?
it's like Gothic.
Gothic.
Yeah, it's
Well,
French Gothic.
I think it was like Gregorian, and then like kind of turned into Gothic because it went over a century and a half to build.
Oh yeah,
So it could change
The-
styles. It did. They added the gargoyles later.
well, even so, Washington National Cathedral.
Yeah.
To me, those two look, very similar. The two towers, and they're like mirror images. I think actually the Washington one, it has a little bit more pizzazz, up top. It's more like, I don't know.
Ornate.
Yeah, but where Notre Dame was a little bit more minimalistic. But anyway, we didn't want to spend this whole episode talking about that, but it's still like the whole concept of that building happening, something like that happening to it, hasn't even like set in. Like, I'm obsessed with architecture and art and history,
Me too.
and
I've always been.
and yeah, so I went on my old Pinterest. I have a Pinterest. Well, I have a but I had this old one that I've since deleted, but I had like tons and tons of pictures. But I had like this whole travel box, and Notre Dame was all over in there. Me too. I even got on Google Maps or Google Earth, and I went on Street View, and I Street Viewed that island. But anyway, so there are other topics though that we did want to cover, because we're already Oh, it's actually only been 15 minutes, but
That's a good segment.
time has flown by. So there's so much we need to catch up on because we haven't seen each other. When were you down there? Was it New Year's? I thought it was New Year's, but maybe I'm getting it mixed up with Christmas.
No, because it was sometime like probably slightly before that, right?
Like between Christmas and New Year's.
I have to come back down for New Year's
I don't even know.
because like
And actually, I only saw you for like one day. I think you were at Dwight's.
I tried to see you, but you were at work.
Oh yeah, there is that.
And I was like, after
And now look at me.
you were asleep the whole time. No.
I did. I slept a lot when you lived there. I don't know why.
No, I mean like when I was down there for
Oh,
that New Year's weekend.
yeah. I know I was working a ton. Actually, I was just tripping out over that pay stub. And from when I was working then, and I was like, that's a lot of overtime. That's a lot of holiday pay. And plus I cashed out like 80 hours worth of paid time off.
Ah,
So, yeah. Anyway, yeah, I was working too much. And I've been better about, like, saying no whenever they're like, you know, hey, work this day, and then work this day, and work a double that day, and then,
I was saying no because I wanted to spend time with you.
yeah.
And you were all like, I said yes.
Ah.
Yeah.
So, anyway, yeah, there's a lot to catch up on. I tried to keep notes, like I would think of something like, oh, we need to talk about this, and then I would forget it if I didn't write it down, and then I write it down and I lose it.
I stole that pack of sticky notes right there from work.
Ah!
After my boss said, we pay a lot of money for those, or the company pays a lot of money for those, and you're just wasting them. And I'm like, ugh. So I shoved that in my pocket.
That's a very Heisenberg.
I did. I felt like Heisenberg in that moment. You're like on the same.
Well,
frequency.
actually, so I watched this trippy video about they were comparing Skylar's
I'm tripping.
Skylar's sister, the klepto. They were comparing her to Heisenberg, how they're
Sure.
kind of twins.
Like, it was like,
But she was like the feminine, less aggressive, more passive aggressive, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, Heisenberg was passive aggressive, but
the counterpart. Like,
she was more womanly about it. Like, because she did like the housewife crimes, you know?
what I was thinking is like she ended up being the Heisenberg on Skylar's side. Like,
Yeah.
Like Skylar had nothing to blame Heisenberg
Yeah.
for because she had someone like that on her side.
Yeah.
You know, and then Hank is like Skylar on Walt's side.
Yeah. Hank and Skylar I think those two were the other twins. They like,
Yeah.
when a lot of times all their lives like kind of like the planets align, you know, and anyway,
Their character development are like
they kind of bounce
similar.
off each other. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That's what I'm trying to say.
You're welcome.
Okay, so that was another thing. So I mentioned to Eric, I was like, hey, let's watch Breaking Bad again. I've literally lost count of how many times I've watched it back to back. And then I introduced you to it.
No, hey, I found out about it
Well-
when it came out, and I snuck a few peeks at it. Well,
I
my
didn't
mom-
even do that.
My mom condemned it when it came out, and she's like, "Oh, it's about drugs and stuff." And my dad, did his thing.
Wait, what is his thing? Just trash talk it.
Yeah, he's like, "Who would put this on TV?" And everyone's going to hell. But no,
This is, by the way, my favorite Amy Winehouse song, Back to Black. Like,
I know.
she wrote all of this, and it was like about her life, and she's
Soliloquy.
yeah, and she
Her
she
songs were
died.
very soliloquy. And what?
They were. I forgot. I was like,
She died.
Yeah, she was her own worst enemy.
No. So anyway, like, what were we saying?
We were talking about Breaking Bad and how you knew about it first. Like, I heard about it, but I never gave it the time of day. I didn't watch anything. I didn't pay attention.
Yeah,
I was actually turned off because everyone was obsessed with it.
I was. I that's exactly what I was just gonna say. Like,
Just like Game of Thrones right now.
even people at church were talking about it, and I was like, "Squeeze me."
And
And I was like, "No, I haven't. I didn't get to see it, because I didn't have a way to, because my parents were all like, it's hell, and I'm like, forget it." And I watched it as soon as I got my own Netflix subscription. And I'd actually already seen like half of it actually before you introduced it to me.
It was literally like you moved in, and I'm like, okay, so I don't even think you were unpacked. And I was like, watch this.
You sat me down and you were like, watch. No, you actually, okay, first it was actually a YouTube video. Remember?
Oh yeah,
You showed me that
that
trailer.
was when I had to try and convince you.
Yeah. Oh, I played along. I'll have you know.
Oh.
Am I stressing you out?
No, it's just,
Why are you covering?
it goes hand in hand.
It does.
Yeah, we're going to take a brief break here. Mark.